don't outsource your thinking, because that's the risk of AI, right? I think the people who are going to be successful are the people who know how to learn and can do first principle thinking, and they use AI as an enablement and an accelerator for that. There is a level of authenticity to a founder's pitch that no salesperson can replicate. So early stage founders, that's my only advice. Focus on product. Don't think about dollars and cents only. Think about your product, think about the fitment, and then think about how you're going to protect your IP.
Today's guest is Ron Gupta, a seasoned CRO and advisor who has spent decades helping technology companies scale revenue and expand into new markets. Having been involved in multiple successful exits, Ron brings first-hand experience in scaling companies from early traction to acquisition. In this episode, we discuss what it really takes to build a revenue engine that scales. We cover why founders should stay involved in sales, how to build a defensible business in the age of AI. We also discuss expanding into new markets and what investors are really looking for in high-growth companies today. So let's jump straight in. Ron, great to see you. Let's kick things off. Give us a quick 30-second intro, who you are, what you do.
Yeah. Hey, Ian. I am a career-long revenue person, right? So I've had different roles. I started off much larger corporations, working on generally the revenue engine, focused on a particular vertical, a particular geography. And then as my career progressed, I found myself gravitating to smaller companies, doing a more inclusive CRO-ish role. I've been a CRO 3 times. And now I also advise companies on how to scale the revenue engines and build efficacy in the system.
Great intro. So yeah, you've quite a unique career because you have such strong experience in big tech and also earlier stage companies. What have you learned in bigger tech that you've brought into the earlier stage companies that you work with now?
Yeah, some of the things are very similar, right? Because ultimately, I've always been in technology sales, right? So ultimately, what you're doing is bringing a product to market that has a technical component, and a value proposition that resonates in the vertical or the geography or the market you're selling into. So that problem definition does not change in the continuum. What does change is what the core tenet of what you're solving for is, right? The variable. In large tech, when you're working in a much larger organization, I started out in public companies, it's all about scale and repeatability. And that's the only thing that matters, right? Because you are essentially running an engine and people keep coming in and out of that engine, and they all need to perform at a similar scale and capability. So it's all about building a system. As you start selling in smaller companies, and especially when you get to founder-led sales, strategy is very important still, right? Product market fit is very important still. Value proposition is very important still. Scale is important, but not quite as relevant as when you are building an engine for a much larger organization, right? So here, strategy is important, but execution is paramount.
Sure.
So that's kind of the difference. Everything else is similar, right? Your way of looking at accounts, your way of prospecting, your way of channeling, your way of building connective tissue, that doesn't change. What does change is the scale and the focus.
Yeah, and I suppose potentially lack of like discipline on the team. So I suppose in a bigger tech, you'd have segmentation around the teams, whereas earlier businesses, you kind of you're wearing multiple hats to a certain extent.
Right, Ian. And honestly, I've worked in all scales, right? So when I'm working at the smallest company I worked at was a Series B organization that had, I think it was basically a founder and 2 salespeople, and neither of the salespeople were especially good at what they were selling, right? So essentially, I wound up becoming the sales guy, even though I was technically the CRO, right? So we ultimately scaled that company, close to 50, and we built out a scale mature organization. But that's not where you start, because you can't, if you're building the foundation wrong, it doesn't matter what engines you put on top of it, right? It's never going to scale right. So first I had to kind of scale everything back, figure out what is the value proposition. The founders probably do it the best, right? So work with them to kind of synthesize that, figure out how do you build an ROI around it? How do you build the mechanics around it? And then you can build the scale, you can build a strategy. All of that stuff sits on top of it.
Yeah, great. Well, yeah, listen, I'd love to get into that. Just before that, I suppose, what brought you into the whole earlier stage business world?
I didn't quite enjoy being a big
Cog in the wheel.
fish in a much, much bigger pond, right? So
Yeah.
one of my larger roles, I was the president of a division uh, that was $100 million division, but it was 6% of the company's revenue, right? So less than 6% of the company's revenue. So as far as you being able to affect change, that ability is pretty minimized. I enjoy being able to put a stamp on a business. I really enjoy doing something that's kind of end to end across the continuum. And, as you start going into smaller companies, to your point from earlier about wearing different hats, you find yourself doing a lot of things. You're doing a core function, you're building a revenue engine, you're talking about M&A. I just love that rhythm and that cadence.
Great. Yeah. Brilliant. And your role now, I know you're doing a lot of advisory work. So who do you specifically support in relation to size, and what do you go into? Like, when are you needed to go into these companies? Like, what's wrong with the business? Or what
Yeah,
challenges are they facing?
nothing's normally wrong, right? When it's
Yeah.
well, it could be wrong, but the ones that I'm talking to right now, there's nothing wrong. They've kind of hit an inflection point where they need some help. And
Sure.
I was very deliberate on not wanting to be a fractional CRO, because that is basically someone who's looking at spreadsheets all day long and managing in absence, which is kind of hard to do. So
Mm.
what I've tried to do is focus on companies that have a very strong technology definition and a very strong value proposition, but they have a problem statement that the current team cannot solve for. And that could vary, right? So for
Mm.
example, I have 3 or 4 clients. Um, One of them is a sports tech company, not a field I spend a lot of time on, but the issues they're running into are around M&A, around they're trying to raise capital, all of that stuff, which I've been through several times in my journey. So I'm helping with that. There's another company that's in kind of mentoring and technology. In that space, they're looking at opening up a new vertical, right? So they have the sales resources, but they don't have the expertise in that vertical or how to kind of click in that space. So I'm helping them with that, right? The third is an insurtech company. So completely different context in every one of these. And the third one is an insurtech company where it's kind of a founder-led sales motion. They've
Yeah.
scaled the company to past 20 million, 25 million, but in Asia Pacific. Now they're coming into the American market, and the founders moved here and they're trying to figure out how do they crack that. They've got some marquee logos already, but how do you scale that? So
Mm.
it's not so much of something's wrong with the company. It's more about there is a problem that can be defined, and
Yeah.
they don't quite understand the solution to the problem or don't have all the keys that they need to unlock it, right? So that's kind of where I tend to come in.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I suppose they've reached a certain point of revenue, and they need to expand that, and they're breaking into potentially new regions, or as you mentioned, revenue as well. Like, all those are interesting. The last one really was interesting, probably to the viewers as well, because I know some of the viewers are, for example, in Ireland, and they're looking to break into the US market, right?
Yeah.
So if a business is looking at breaking into that market, like, what's the first thing I do? Like, are you advising founders to move over to the US first of all? Is that a good
In
move?
this scenario that already moved over,
Yeah.
I have had exposure to building a team here. The issue is always bandwidth, right? So
Mm.
there is a level of authenticity to a founder's pitch that no salesperson can replicate, right? So
Yeah.
the company that we had a wonderful exit at prior to this, um, I thought the best salesperson there was one of the founders, right? It didn't matter how much enablement and training and bells and whistles you put around the deck. Ultimately, there was a level of authenticity that the founder could bring that nobody else could, right? So there's founder sparkle or whatever you want to call that, right?
Mm.
So I don't necessarily ask the founders to move here. That needs to be a choice that they make on their own, because there are variables I don't know. Like, are they already a thriving business somewhere else and they can't seed that market? And if the founders leave, maybe the market doesn't, it diminishes there, right? So there's variables to that question. But in general, I'll say the most authentic salesperson is always going to be the founder. If US is going to be the predominant market that you want to focus on, then I would say the founder has to put a lot of attention there, whether that's moving here or putting up a base here and spending 6 months here, 6 months there, whatever that is.
Yeah. Okay. That makes perfect sense. And say, for example, they didn't decide to stay, or sorry, if they didn't decide to go, they stayed in whatever country they were in. What hire is the most important hire next? Is it someone like yourself or an IC?
Well, I mean, selfishly, I'd say give me a call, right? But on a
There you
serious
go.
note, I think you're a really thought leader I see, right? So someone who's, and again, it depends on what you're selling. Is it a horizontal product? In which case, I would say if it's a horizontal product, I'd say just hire a really strong revenue person, right? So someone who knows the discipline of revenue and cycle management. If it's a vertical solution that you're selling, and more with AI, there seems to be a propensity for selling verticalized solutions. If you're selling one of those vertical solutions, whether it's insurtech or health tech or ed tech or government or regulated industries, get someone who has credibility in that space and understands sales, right? So that is key because you need somebody who can walk indoors. And of course, the other thing that I advise companies that are coming up is build an advisory network around you, right? There are
Mm,
executives who have been in these organizations who have immense amount of tribal knowledge, native knowledge that you can't learn from somewhere else. ChatGPT is not going to tell you about it, right? Because nobody knows. It's in somebody's head. So, find the right advisors who can, first of all, help you with the product direction, because generally there's some regionalization that's required in products as well. It's not just, something that works. Think about insurtech. Insurance works very differently in the UK, whether it's
yeah.
health or life and an annuity. It works very differently there than it does here. The rules are different. You have a global payer there with your NHS. You don't have that here. So there's all of these nuances that you have to kind of productize for. So bring in an advisor or a set of advisors who can help you with that product direction to regionalize it, but also be able to walk you into certain doors with a preset level of credibility attached to it.
Sure.
Warm introductions work best when you're starting off.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And like that advisor network, how would you suggest to attract them or get them on your side?
Well, so the first thing is your product. So same thing as sales, right? So when I'm looking at,
Mm,
I told you my number one qualifying criteria is I need to make sure the product is strong and there's a value that it actually brings to the market. That's the same thing these advisors are going to be looking for as well, right? And I worked with some really strong executives. There are some people I have some folks on speed dial, based on industry where I'm like, hey, if I get into this industry, can I pick your brain? Maybe you don't want to be an advisor, but I still want to ask for your advice, right? So and generally build these networks over time. And there's favors that both parties have done for each other, so people will take a phone call from me at this point, right? And sometimes I'll tell, like, the founder of this company, there are a couple of people I introduced them to, and I said, like, look, you have to convince them that your product has legs, because otherwise, they have limited bandwidth. Typically these folks are, you know either retired or a step away from retirement, so they're not necessarily looking to take on 20 engagements and work 40 hours a week. They want to pick one or two bets that they want to make, and there has to be something in it for them as well, right? So and typically, at least the ones that I work with, don't look for compensation. They'll look for some equity, right? Because they've already made it. These guys are folks who
yeah.
had 5 admins when they were working in their last job, right? So um, you know for them, it's important that they're staking the credibility on this. So it's important for them that they don't lose face. So they have to feel very confident the product can deliver what you're telling them it can deliver. And if they feel that, they also work from an altruistic perspective, right? So especially if we're thinking about insurance or health, most of these executives actually want to see greater good happen. So if they
Yeah.
feel that your product can take them there, they're very willing to lean in, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I suppose they're past that kind of making money stage and they're probably more humble in themselves and they want to give back more, right? And give back to products that
Absolutely.
mean something. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And just back to that hiring piece. So, say, for example, the founder didn't move over to the US and they're looking to hire, and you mentioned vertical, I suppose experience within that vertical is important. Would you rate that experience ahead of company stage experience?
That's actually a really good question, Ian. It depends. I think once you're past the 10, 15 million, I would say yes, I would. Before 10, you are basically inventing fire and the wheel and every other invention that needs to be invented, right? So there's nothing there, right? So when you're at that stage, early stage experience is a huge plus. Can it be done without it? Of course. I mean, I did it, right? Because the first time I went to a startup, the experience I had before that was a $1 billion company, right? So but it is a steeper learning curve, right? So if someone has had that experience of like, hey, when I want to do a pitch, I don't necessarily have a corporate deck as yet. I need to build that. Or simple things like I'm going to travel and there isn't the corporate booking systems. I got to figure this thing out. And by the way, I got to stay at the lowest possible rate, like whatever that is.
Mm.
So there's simple things, there's complex things, and things that you need and you take for granted in your job function. Those in a really early stage company are not there. So if bringing in someone who's used to that helps. Now, when you pass 10, there's a slightly different problem, right? So thought leadership is important because here the issue is not about do I have a deck or do I have a sales process? Am I using Medic or Medpic? That stuff's figured out generally before you get to 10, 15, 20 million. The problem there now is credibility because you got to walk in a door with a company and a product that nobody has heard of, right? So if I go in and I talk to them about company X, which doesn't exist today, and my competitor is Oracle or Pegasystems or, Salesforce, ServiceNow, these are all known quantities to them. And I'm going to go tell them, hey, I've got something that's bigger, better, faster than those guys, but you've never heard of them before, right? And by the way, they don't have a presence here or an office that you can go to or see a demo at, right? So that credibility will only work if I have personally, or the person you hire, that person has already walked those hallways before and talked those talks before and has already built some trust there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a good point. And I suppose, yeah, like if you're like, for example, you went into that space without having startup experience, do you think it comes down to the interview and identifying traits
It does.
that would, yeah,
I'm a big
supportive?
believer in intellectual honesty, right? So you got to be honest
Yeah.
with yourself, and if you're honest about what the gaps are, then you can use first principles thinking to kind of solve for that. But first thing is the realization, right? So, you know, going from a large company to a smaller company initially for me, the two things that I anchored on was I figured I'd be working very closely with the founders. So the dating process is important. I think I had like 7 conversations and a couple of lunches with a founder because I wanted to make sure that there was chemistry there was trust there, right? Because I felt like if you're going to be solving, and I still feel this, and I'm talking to a $100 million company right now, and I still feel the same way. It's not the founders here, it's the CEOs, but I feel the chemistry is so important and the culture is so important because you are going through transformation, and transformation is not a clean process. Like it's not like, a McKinsey chart that just works every time, right? It's going to fail. There are going to be points where you question your own capabilities. When we question, there'll be questions about the product. There'll be questions about engineering. There's going to be questions about revenue. There's going to be things that you're not certain about, right? And at those times, having respect and trust in each other is paramount, right? Everything else fails in comparison to that. Now, once you've got past that, then everything else that you asked about, Ian, like, building for growth, all of that is important. But when you're coming in early, when you're making friends, that's what I kind of anchored on, is like, make sure I have that chemistry. And of course,
Relationship,
in order to understand the product and technology as well.
sure, yeah. You touched on one of the challenges being getting investment, right? And I know you have a great network in the VC and PE space. So what challenges typically come up with earlier stage businesses around investment?
Yeah. I mean, I would say I have decent networks. I don't think I have great networks, but I do keep trying to build that.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, it's a vicious circle. Investors, I mean, VCs, PEs, whichever one you look at, they have a slightly different thesis on how they go to market, although it's tending to blur a little bit because when I first started working with smaller companies, VCs were all about growth. They didn't care about profitability. They would just grow at all costs, right? And we'll get profitable later. And PEs were all rule of 40 and a bit, that's blending now because the challenge that investors have is investors also have people they're responsible to. They're responsible to the LPs, right? So they need to produce returns. So there's pressure on them as well, right? So when they're investing in you, the first thing they want to know is that they can make returns. How can they make returns? They can make returns if you're bringing something that has a value proposition that resonates in the market, right? So you have something either unique, or you have something that's differentiated, or you can do it at a scale that nobody else can. There has to be something that you have. What's your unique sauce? And that's getting harder and harder for founders to prove because there's just so much noise. With AI today, the barrier to entry has gone down, right? People can create slick decks, right? They can create demos that look very convincing, although there isn't really a strong product sitting behind it. So there is, the sniff test is getting harder and harder to pass through, right? the way you solve for that as a founder is get your first few linchpin clients, right? I mean, I know this is again a vicious circle, right? Like because they need the revenue to go get the clients, and they
Yeah.
need clients to go prove viability to go get revenue, right? To go get investments. But getting the first few clients is so important, right? So some of the founders who I've met have started in in a role working in a company solving a problem for a particular company, and then they go like, hey, look, I've got a better solution, let me build that for you and as a product, right? And then they kind of go into a into a company that way, right? So they
Yeah.
already have a customer day one. That is brilliant if you can do that. If you can't, if you're somebody who is like sitting in a garage and going like, just looking at the white space and trying to figure out like what are the problem definitions out there, what separate the signal from the noise, then your challenge is going to be getting that first customer. I think that's more important than getting your first investor. Okay.
Interesting.
Hopefully you
Yeah.
can bootstrap through it. If you can't, you give me a call. There are other things you can do, but like ideally, don't go get an investment until you have your first customer or two, paying customer, not pilots. And
Yes.
certain markets that like are on a on a
Hi.
trajectory, on a
Yeah.
those are different. Like if you're there, it's all about the hype and it's all about the cycle tendencies, and you could probably go get investment, you can get millions and billions of dollars for like very little, right? But for everything else, if you're selling a SaaS product or a vertical tech, go get your first customer, focus really hard on that, do what you have to, and then everything becomes easier.
Yeah.
Also, I'm sorry, I know I've been talking for a long while.
No, no, it's good. Keep going.
One thing that I think is important for founders to realize is money doesn't, it's kind of interesting when I'm talking to one of my clients who are raising capital. I had to kind of explain how that process works, because when you raise capital, you're essentially diluting your stake in the company, right? And you're diluting based on the value of the company. So if you don't have a client, your revenue is zero, you don't have a proof point. What is your valuation? It's so
Yeah.
low that you're giving up a huge stake for very little money, right? If you can even get that one customer, it dramatically flips the script on you.
So they're nearly. Are you seeing that as a common trend? They're looking for investment too early.
Yes, they are,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff that goes on with TV shows, and people read news clips about some kid from MIT getting like, what was it, 30 billion or 20 billion from Elon
Mm.
Musk. So there's this thing that there's free money floating around out there, right? A lot of people come in, a lot of the early stage founders are technologists. They're not coming from an MBA or a finance background. They don't know how
Yeah.
equity works. They don't know how debt works, right? They're looking at, hey, I've got a really cool technology. If I had like another, it's not a big number, but if I had $200,000, I'm a college student, I don't have $200,000. If I had $200,000, I could take this to market, right? What they haven't figured out is what are they giving up for that 200,000, right? First of all. Secondly, their product's really good, but do they have a base of people who want to buy it? Again, I focus on enterprise, right? Like
Yeah.
business to business. Business to consumer is completely different, right? You could come up with a
Sure.
really cool idea, put it on an app, and you're off to the races, right? Business
Yeah.
to business, right? You have to prove viability, which means you need to have engineering in the back end, right? You need to have deployment constructs. So there's so many other problems that you have to solve that isn't just the pure technology, like cool solution part of it, right? Think through all of that before you go raise money, before you go talk to a customer. So there's a sequence of events.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great advice. So you've been involved in two exits, isn't that right? Three.
I've been involved in a few exits, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. So yeah, you become a master in that space. So I suppose what makes a business exit ready?
Ooh, master in that space. I've kind of seen the Yoda outfit sitting out. Look, I don't think you ever become a master in that until you've done like probably 10, 12, or you've been on the other side of it. If you've been on the buy side and the sell side, then it becomes kind of interesting. What makes it exit ready is velocity. And so depends. If it's a PE exit, it's usually, profitability, right? That's the only profitability plus growth. So the rule of 40 for, I realize your viewers are not all from the same ilk.
Yeah.
So there's something that private equity tends to focus on, something called rule of 40, which is basically your growth plus your EBITDA, which is basically your profitability, simplifying
Yeah.
it, should be at least 40%, right? So if you're growing north of that, so if you're growing at 100%, maybe you don't need to be as profitable, right? But if you're growing at 20%, then you need to be profitable as well. So that's generally one of the criteria that PE has been using in the past. And, there's different, that's a sliding scale. So there's different elements of that. Now, obviously, we talked about the hype piece. If there's velocity, one of the companies I exit, we 300 timed our growth from a pretty, from a double-digit number. We went 3x in a year, right?
Wow.
That's like incredible velocity. When you have that velocity, people pay attention, right? And then they had a problem which would keep doing that, that anchored on a solution which I believe could keep doing that 2-3x growth for the next 5 years, probably, right? So it becomes an amazing investment. Plus, that was a strategic exit. So a public company bought them, and the public company could see that as a growth driver for them, right? Not so much necessarily for the overall revenue, but from a growth perspective, that could become a growth engine, right? From from a new acquisition perspective, right? So you have to solve a problem for somebody. If it's a strategic acquisition, think about Salesforce buying MuleSoft, right? Salesforce bought MuleSoft, not specifically because MuleSoft was growing very fast, but it fit into their strategy because they're buying all of these companies that needed to be integrated. And if they could get a middleware layer that could then it could be one Salesforce instead of 15 different companies or 500 different companies that Salesforce acquired. So that's where MuleSoft played a part outside of just pure growth, right? So you have to solve a problem for the buyer. And that's either, I'm going to make a ton of money on these people, or they're getting to a niche that I can address any other way.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And is there anything that early stage founders can implement now that will help them exit at a later stage? Because I suppose a lot of what you're saying there comes in stages to a certain extent, but then also it doesn't, because solving a problem is what you should be doing at the start. Right?
Yeah. So one of the investors that I work with would harp on this, and when he told me, because I was on the revenue side of things, I was like, come on, we can always sell past things, right? But now I see a lot of wisdom in what he said. What he said was product market fit, product market fit, product market fit. That trumps everything, right? Because as a founder in an early stage company, just make sure you're building a product that has tremendous demand. And then once you have that, you're building a moat around it that protects you, right? Because having a really cool product is good, but the problem is if somebody could imitate that, right? And with AI, it's so you can write code your way through anything these days. Someone could have something similar pop up in like 6 months, right? How do you insulate yourself from that? So as an early stage founder, I first of all think about what's the product market fit, what's the value proposition you're bringing, what's the return on investment a buyer would get from it, and then how do you protect your sovereignty, right? So how do you make sure you have some moats built around you? It could be data. It could be like you're now, once you start doing the work you're doing, you're getting access to data that like nobody else has. It could be referenceability. It could be like, hey, look, I've got returns for like the top 5 in my space, top 5 companies in my space. So the next 20 are probably going to buy from me, right? Because there's a FOMO aspect to it as well. But you have to figure out your moat. So early stage founders, that's my only advice. Focus on product. Don't think about dollars and cents only. Think about your product. Think about the fitment, and then think about how you're going to protect your IP.
I suppose that's why it's so important for founders to be involved in the sales process early on, because I suppose the product they've built initially isn't going to be the finished product, and how you improve it is listen to the customers, and then you need to be involved in that to listen.
100%. The feedback loops are so important, right? So when you're a founder-led company, I advise founders to sell, right? So companies where I've helped them sell, I walk in with the founder, but I always take the founder with me. Like, and they listen if they're not pitching. Some of them are pure technologists, they don't like to pitch, right? But that's fine. Sit in the room with the top salespeople and listen, right? See the feedback coming back. Also, customer advisory boards, right? So if you have 5-6 customers now, like you've grown a little bit, listen to the customers, right? Because they're going to tell you, when you're selling, you're hearing about, this is what I need, right? When you talk to a customer, you're hearing like, this is what I want. That I don't have, right? I've said, I've expressed my desires before, but now that I'm using it, I'm finding that these are the gaps that have to still be closed. So it gives you a different lens to it, but kind of helps you kind of form that holistic view of what your product needs to be ultimately. And then when you scale an org, then that becomes a function. So when I talked about growth engines and scale, it's not just about getting more reps and getting more customer success people. It's building these feedback loops, because then your solution consulting team or your solution engineering team become the loop into product and engineering, right? So they're bringing feedback back from the customer going like, hey, this field doesn't work properly, or I need a feature that lets me compare this set of data against that set of data, or whatever that is, right? And that's going to like drive your product roadmap continuously.
Yeah, I suppose that's where the collaboration internally, internal stakeholder management is super important. I'd imagine at that stage,
100%.
Yeah,
Like I said, I always dating super important to me when you're forming a relationship with a company. Don't rush it, and I'd say the same thing for founders, and folks who are listening to your podcast who would be hiring people. Spend time getting to know the person, right? Don't just listen to one pitch and go like, oh, this guy's great, or don't just see one presentation and go like, that's great, it's going to work for me because he's done it before, right? Make sure
yeah,
the chemistry works for you. Make sure his fitment. I'll tell you an interesting story, even from hiring a salesperson perspective. One of my best salespeople at the company that exit was somebody who worked for me in the past and was not very successful there, right? Because he was great. It's not like he was a bad salesperson. The product wasn't the right fit for him because his model of selling was it was like an evangelization cycle, right? Like, so he'd spend a lot of thought leadership time and explain how things work. He was an expert in his industry. That worked really well when you're selling multi-million-dollar deals, right? Because the customer wants to learn from you at the same time as we're going down the process. But when you were selling $100,000, $150,000 product, it's a much more tactical thing. And there, they're just trying to solve one quick problem and get on with it, right? So, his momentum, the way he engaged his customer, all of that was built on a different kind of engine. So he worked for me there, not successful. I worked with him again in another company. He was making seven figures every year, right? Seven-figure payout for himself, not like for the company.
yeah,
He's
yeah.
holding $20 million deals for the company. So it's just about, it's date the person, make sure the chemistry works for what they're doing.
Yeah, that's great advice, and that's a very interesting story. So I suppose back to the point about hiring even that first salesperson. I suppose the type of sell it is, the deal size, the sales cycle is super important because some individuals may suit it and some may not.
Yeah. Yeah.
AI is now the talking point of obviously everything, right? So, like you're obviously a lot in the enterprise selling space, but how is AI affecting I suppose, engagement with customers? Like, are you seeing roles disappear on the BDR side, or what are you seeing at the minute?
It's not disappearing, but it's flipping slowly. I won't say I still think there's a need for a BDR in certain scenarios. I think there's a lot of noise in the system, right? Because again, the barrier to entry has come down dramatically, right? There's so many more companies today than there were before that are sitting on the back of pure AI.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there's so many tools out there that make sending things like sending emails at mass with customized voice. When it first came out, I was like, "Ooh, that's really cool." Now I'm like, "That sucks," because I
Yeah.
personally get like 150 emails a day, right? So I can only imagine how my buyers feel about getting their the mailboxes spammed and the voicemail spammed all day long, right? So it's very hard for them to differentiate the signals to the noise. So the messaging, the marketing aspect becomes very important. BDRs aren't going away, but what I am seeing is like it's kind of gone full cycle. I remember a point about 5, 6, 7 years back when we were emphasizing on digital media and scaling back from events, right? Um,
Hmm.
and we just thought from an investment perspective, it made so much more sense. Now I feel with so much of technology touch and so little of human touch, it's kind of flipped. So
And looks away.
opportunities you get to have human interactions are gold, right?
Yeah.
And I will say personally, I've closed more business on handshakes in the last 3 years than I have through any other channel, right? So people we've
Brilliant.
met
Yeah.
at a conference or an event that we hosted as somebody lunch and learns or like a dinner event for executives, those have been paying off way more dividends than they did in the past, right? And I'll tell you, I talked to a CEO recently of a Fortune 500, CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and what he was telling me was they're cutting, and this is a financial services organization, and they're cutting, quite extensively across their company, right? Because they have the AI mandate and all of that stuff. But the one place they're not cutting is sales, because that's a human to human contact, right? Because even when you're doing multi-million or maybe hundreds of $1 million finance deals, ultimately there's a trust component to it. There's a human component that needs to be built, and the people will still be buying from people for a while, right? So that's the one part. The other piece is revenue engineering has become very, very important. Like it was just RevOps before, it was just basically a data and reporting function.
Yeah.
Now I see there's multiple layers of AI being brought into a sales organization. So tier one would be like simple things like account research, like just, do better account research. There's tools for it. Um, do better reporting, like all of that stuff. That's just foundational, right? The next level is management. So enablement tools that use AI technology. The third level that I'm seeing, which is where it gets super interesting, is where we start using agents. So being able to do digital clones in some scenario, especially on the BDR, SDR front, can we do more of that? Are there ways to put, like, for example, Gong, tools that are out there are also vertically integrating with AI. So Gong, we've been using it for years, but now you can do, I don't want to plug just Gong by itself, but there are other tools that do the same thing. But tools like that have now got sensors built in, AI sensors, where it'll tell you like, hey, I just launched this new messaging. Is it being used in the field, right? What's the response to it? So you can learn so much more in ways that would have been completely unlikely to happen before, and then so time consuming, right? Decks, like honestly, for me, like board decks, like I'm good at writing a narrative. I suck at designing decks, right? So it was usually I'd have my I'd have my designer back and forth with me, like, and it's not a very, it's a cumbersome process. Now I can do all of that in like Claude, and like I write the narrative and I say, Claude, build me a deck. And then I say like, okay, this side put here from there. And like, it's as long as you don't outsource your thinking, the thinking is you, and you outsource presentation, that's amazing. And then like I've been seeing like interesting things, like there's customer success tools that are out there that would before people would kind of look to see which customers are not satisfied with you and are likely like gain side. Like you could use that to kind of figure out like which customers are red. Sure, everybody's been doing that. Now I can put AI on top of that and go, which customers are actually more likely to buy based on the signals that I'm getting from them? How do I get some expansion out of this, right? So that's kind of where I think the companies that differentiate themselves, the tools are the same, right? It's not like they have different tools than anybody else. It's not that magic tool piece. I think it's how they use it. So that revenue engineering piece becomes kind of very central to that.
Yeah, that's such a good overview. And I suppose, yeah, it's not necessarily about getting AI to execute. It's very much equipping people with AI to get informed knowledge to then execute. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. And the part that I say, like, I have a son who's in college right now, and when he was looking at a degree, and this is the funny part, and then I'll talk about the actual part that I was brought the point up about. But the funny part was like when he was going to college, like this was 6 months before ChatGPT like became a thing, right? And LLMs were all the rage. And he was like, "Hey, Dad, what do I study?" And he got into business and computer science. I'm like, "Computer science, man! Everybody has a job after computer science." And then he starts his program, and now he's like, "There's no jobs in computer science." So I think you'll figure it out. Lean into the EQ part, like lean into the human aspect. But the reason I bring that up is the one thing I advise him on is don't outsource your thinking, because that's the risk of AI, right? Because it's so easy to say like, "Hey, build me a revenue plan," right? Like, here are the parameters, just build me one. Don't do that, right? Because first of all, I think the people who are going to be successful are the people who know how to learn and can do first principle thinking, and they use AI as an enablement and an accelerator for that, right? If you outsource it, you are hollowing yourself out. Your skills are not developing, and honestly, you cannot think like a machine, right? So AI might give you an amazing plan, but now you got to execute that plan, and that plan is not yours. It's a machine's plan, right? So don't let your thinking be outsourced. As long as you do that part of it, amplifying that through AI is great.
Yeah. You're probably the first person to say that
Really?
about AI. Yeah, because I have this mentality, and I've actually chatted to friends about this, and I feel like, especially younger generations, they'll suffer more than people later on in their careers, because I suppose they've developed that muscle, right?
Yeah, no,
I mean, they're conscious of it.
100%. It's like very risky. And like, here's the thing that I find challenging, right? And I've been talking to friends of mine who work at much larger companies, because we can't do this. I can't solve this problem, but I need people to think about it, which is like, how have I got where I've gotten today? It's by, starting much lower, making mistakes along the way, learning, and then at some point I'm an expert at something, right? Or I'm at least better than I was at it before. What I'm seeing now, when you're talking about the labor pool going right, BDRs, by the way, is one of those, right? BDRs come in and they start learning how to pitch, they start learning how to get rejections, they start learning objection handling, and that makes them a good salesperson. So then they become a junior account executive. So there was a transition, there's a progression that
Yeah.
was laid out from a career trajectory perspective. What's happening now is with AI, a lot of the entry level jobs are no longer needed. I don't need a intern to make my presentations for me. I don't need a BDR. I can automate that, right? How do you make up? So it doesn't affect my career much, right? Because they still, at least for now, they still need my level of expertise, right?
Sure.
Ian, you're going out in the market. They need your level of expertise. We've gone through the developmental phases, right? And we're still learning as we go along, but a lot of the stuff we already know, and they're bringing in experts. Same thing in development. Like if you're doing coding, they want senior developers. What they don't need is the junior guys who are doing the first level scripting, right? But that's kind of your farm league, your training league to get to your professional stages, right? If you don't
Exactly.
have that, how do you groom the next generation of leaders, right? I don't know how to solve for that because I don't have the budget to say like, and when I'm talking to smaller companies and they're like, 20, $30 million companies, I can't tell them go invest $1 million and go hire some people who you don't need today, but you need to build them up, right? But I think larger companies have to start thinking in terms of academies, in terms of training. How do you enable the people to kind of be your work pool and your labor pool 20 years downstream?
Yeah, that's such a good point. And like I see it working both ways as well, because obviously the bigger companies will potentially do that, but then earlier stage companies can't really do it. But then you're also seeing younger generations starting businesses earlier,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because they have more access to tools and they can learn quicker. So it's an interesting dynamic what's actually happening, you know?
Very,
So the next few
very.
years will be
I
like,
think
yeah,
that's why I said the most important thing is one is your EQ today because technology is going to get commoditized, right? So your
yeah,
emotional quotient, your ability to like relate to people is going to be very important. And the other thing is your ability to learn, right? Because I don't know. I don't think any of us know where the world's going to go. I mean, even the gurus, when you ask Elon Musk and you ask the Chat GPT guys and the Claude guys, like, where is AI going to go? And they're like, oh, it could have this outcome or it could have this like dramatically different outcome, right? And they're not sure. And these are the guys who are like, they're the ones who are seeding all of the technology, right?
yep,
So we have no clue what's going to happen in 10, 15 years time. Never before has it been like this, .com was a thing, but it was a very contained thing. We knew internet was going to do, it was going to be a channel for communication and reach. But like, it wasn't changing human behavior and technology behavior,
mm,
all of that in one fell swoop. AI is going to do that, right? So, and we don't know where it's going to go. So being able to learn and adapt, same thing when you're hiring people. Like, I think you asked me like, what's important for the first hire somebody who can learn and who can adapt, right? Because you will need that down the
yeah.
street.
And like how I'll touch on hiring now in the next minute or two, but go to market is changing, right? And team structure is ultimately changing then because of AI. So how are you structuring your go to market team now versus where you were doing it before?
Yeah. So, you know, the focus is now on the revenue engineering aspect of it. So the data, consuming the data, figuring out what the gaps are. So that's becoming more and more critical. I am hollowing out, or at least in most companies that I'm working with, there's one that's an exception, but most companies we're kind of taking down the BDR, SDR teams quite a bit. And the other area, the sellers have not really been affected much as yet. I haven't seen like 20% reduction in sales AE headcount because that's the tip of the spear. That's the revenue engine. People haven't started making those kind of cuts. And I'm not convinced it's going to work as yet because unless, again, if you're selling to enterprise, if you're selling more B2C, or if you're selling small mid-market where it's like, you can do fulfillment over the internet, that's great. But like when you're doing full contact sales engagements, you still need the sellers. The
Sure.
other area that I'm seeing is forward deployed engineering is coming to the fore. So a lot of, so where does customer success sit? Does it sit as part of the product organization leaning in, right? Like into forward deployed and becoming almost an aspect of forward deployed engineering? Do we separate customer operations from customer success and delivery? Like, so there's some questions that, and every solution is bespoke based on the organization and what they're selling and who they're selling it to. But I've seen that's some of the variables that I'm starting to consider now in conversations when we are talking about building an organization. Um, Marketing's changing dramatically, right? So first of all, a lot of the design work now is much easier to do, right? So you don't need a
Yeah.
15% team to do that anymore, right? Product development, so product marketing is getting leaner and tighter and more faster cycles, right? On the outreach and pipeline building side, on demand gen, the focus is switching more towards ABM, account-based marketing, and brand, right? We're not doing the one-to-many things very much more because it gets lost in noise. It's more either very curated with landing pages and things like that, where you're going after a large deal, or it's like, here's our brand overall and building a big picture of that, right? So that's every aspect of it. Same thing with customer success. There's quicker loops that's happening. We're trying to automate self-service a lot of the older customer success functions. We're trying to do a more condensed cab so you can do customer advisory boards and make your learning sessions faster. So that's like every aspect of it's getting impacted.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to try and figure out which ones are purely because of AI and which one is just an evolution, right? So
Yeah. A lot of testing though, isn't there? I'd imagine there's a lot of trial error across the board.
there is, if you're selling a horizontal product, right? If you're selling a verticalized product, in very often your ICP, your ideal customer profile, is pretty narrow. So testing is very risky, right? Because like, if you're
Small
selling,
time.
let's say like a product which you're selling to like the top, we can only sell to the top 50 companies in a particular space, and you kill it by going with the wrong product test to somebody, like then you're dead in the waters, like that they're never going to buy from you, and you have 2% less of your market. So it depends on what the product is. And engineering is generally getting faster, right? So we talked about sales, but sales is only the tip of the spear. The back end is always going to be product and engineering. That's what allows for faster iterations, which leads to more testing. My recommendation is, when you're testing, always test with friendlies. So go to a customer who already has you and tell them, hey, I'm about to launch something very cool that's going to help you out. I will give it to you for free for the first year. If you don't like it, I'll just take it away. There's no cost to you. Let me build it for you and prove it out, right? Build it in a
Yeah.
sandbox. That's a better way to do it than to go to a new customer and go like, hey, so Salesforce, I believe, had this rule, that they would never sell. There were certain products that they had bookmarked. You could not lead a sales engagement with those products, right? That had to be a follow-on, because they felt there had to be some maturity, not in the company, not in the prospect or the client, but in the relationship of the two, before they could absorb something which was as high impact as that product, right? So there's
Sure.
probably more, it might be more intensity around delivery. It might be, hey, there's generally a lot of back and forth and things don't work first. Whatever that is, that you should identify whatever you're testing with. Is it something that's an easy insertion, or is it something that's going to be hard to insert? If it's hard, start with a friendly.
Sure. Okay. Great advice. Just one last point on hiring in this AI world. When it comes to sales, go to market hiring, what are you looking out for now that you weren't looking out for before with hires?
Yeah. Adaptability is becoming super important. So I look like, tactically, the way that works is that I ask somebody, like, I try to figure out how they have changed across their career, right? Have they like taken on, have they sold markedly different products, right? Like, have they had success selling middleware and then selling a vertical SaaS and then healthcare, like something, right? What, because you're looking for actual identifiable tags that'll tell you behavioral patterns, right? The behavior you're looking for is adaptability, intellectual honesty, right? And obviously drive, because the best salespeople are people who are not ever happy at 100%. They want to go 300%, right? So they're all in
Yeah.
ADHD. But those things you can't, if you ask somebody, salespeople do something called project, right? Interviewing salespeople is the hardest skill in the world, because, if you ask me questions, I can be who you want me to be, right? And you can pick that up. Salespeople can pick those signals up. So very soon they're like, I know what Ian's looking for. I'm going to answer question
Yeah.
that way Ian's looking for an answer, right? So it's very hard to gauge them. So what I look at empirical data points. I look at their resume. I look at their background. Success is very easy to measure in sales. Like, you can tell me you sold $10 million last year. It doesn't mean anything to me, right? Because I don't know what your quota was. You could be selling, I don't
Yeah.
know, nuclear reactors that are 100 million each. So you had a really bad year last year. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, if you kind of measure their success from a paycheck perspective over a period of time, you can't ask any in the US anymore, like, what did you make last year? But you can ask them, what are your best 5 years, right? And most good reps will validate that. They'll say, I'll send you data for that. Have they been to club every year if their company has a club, which is also going away? And then the empirical signal for learning. So this is all for success, prior success. But the learning signals to me are, have you done something from a role perspective or a function perspective or a product perspective that has been markedly different, where you've actually picked up something completely new? That's the
Okay.
two things.
So changing vertical or changing, yeah, as you mentioned, selling into a different vertical or
Something, or you went from being an engineer like in a company to being a sales guy, right? Like so one of the companies I worked for, the chief product officer was also the best evangelist, had a Harvard degree but in English, right? And he was the
Mm,
chief technology officer, so you know that shows that the person can obviously learn, right? So
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
always find
You've
that
computer science. Am I right in
I
saying
do
that?
have computer science,
Yeah,
yes,
I saw that.
and
So that's
then
that's a
I
bit
hit
of a
it.
pivot as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I hit it under an MBA, right? So
Okay. But good adaptability, especially now.
that's right. I
Yeah.
do believe, like, I think so. If people ask me like what my superpower is, I do think it's adaptability because I've changed quite dramatically throughout my career. What I've sold, I don't anchor on that. I just want to make sure it's a good technology fit and it has a good value proposition. I believe that that's why even right now my clients are across such wide dispersed contexts and markets. I'm solving their problem for them. I don't if I don't I'm not a technologist. That's part of the reason I got away from computer science is because then you are upgrading the same skills every year, right?
Yeah.
If you're in sales or revenue or some of those more people functions, my core skill isn't my technology skills. That's my ability to learn is influenced by that. My core skill is my ability to empathize and with a problem statement and with my
Mm,
prospects and customers, right? So if I understand what they're trying to solve for, I will not sell them something unless I believe I'm actually bringing them value, right? I don't want to be a used car salesman, right? So if I'm selling something to Ian, I want to be sure because my credibility ultimately, I want to be sure it's something that Ian needs. And if it's not, Ian, great to meet you. Here's what we sell today. I'll come back to you when I have something more relevant, right?
yes.
That's it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I love that because I suppose it's very much human traits versus because a lot of people would say AI there, right?
Yeah.
Learning AI or how to use AI, but I suppose your answer is a bit deeper than that. And I suppose that kind of curiosity piece or adaptability then will lead them into being able to use AI, right?
Yeah, I mean, AI,
Yeah,
like everything
yeah,
else, is a tool, right? Like, I mean,
yeah,
and we don't know, AI has not completely manifested as yet, right? I don't know
yeah.
what the final form of AI is going to be, or not even the final, the next form of AI is going to be. And think about how rapidly the models have evolved. Like, if you go from, Chat GPT 1 to 2, like, well, every time they launch a new model, it's dramatically different. Claude can do stuff like, I used to pay somebody in finance like hundreds of $1,000s every couple of years to kind of manage things that Claude can do for free now, right? So
Yeah, it's
it's
crazy.
amazing. So I don't know what skill sets are going to be in demand 5 years downstream. So just be able to learn.
Yeah. Ron, that was great. So much useful insights there. So thank you so much for that.
It
Really
was an
good to have
absolute
you on.
pleasure, Ian. I know we've been
Yeah.
chatting for a while, so it's nice to make this happen. Really excited for
I'll
this
have to get you on
conversation.
again. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sounds good.
And Ron, if someone wanted to reach out to you, website, LinkedIn, what is it?
LinkedIn's the best bet. LinkedIn's the best bet for me, and I'm super approachable. So if anyone wants to pick my brain, any of your viewers at any point in time, it's Ron Gupta. I'm on LinkedIn. Look me up. Happy to help.
Nice. Thanks so much, Ron. Cheers.